The nurse told me my mother died, but she just called me. I want you to take you to that parking lot. I want you to feel the specific, total weight of what I was carrying in that moment. The ring in my hand, my mother's ring, the one she had worn for 51 years, the one my father had placed on her finger at an altar in 1971 and that had not left her hand since. The nurse had placed it in my palm with the specific, practiced gentleness of someone who has performed this gesture many times and has learned exactly how much pressure to apply and how long to hold the contact before releasing. She had said, "She's gone." Just those two words, "She's gone." And I had walked out of that hospital because I could not be inside it for one more second, because the inside of it had become the place where my mother was no longer alive, and I needed air, and I needed the sky above me, even if the sky was a gray November sky that offered nothing. I was in the parking lot. I was sitting on the ground, not on a bench, on the actual ground, because my legs had made a decision my mind had not caught up to. I was holding the ring. I was crying in the way that you cry when grief is so large it stops being about tears and becomes about breathing, about the basic mechanical work of continuing to take in air and release it when every instinct says stop. And my phone buzzed. FaceTime from my mother's number. I want you to think about what happens in the body when something impossible presents itself. Not fear, not immediately, a kind of total system pause. The phone buzzed and I looked at it and I saw her name on the screen and I thought, someone has her phone. Someone is calling me from her phone, and this is going to be one more terrible thing in a terrible hour, and I cannot do it. I answered anyway, because it was her name on the screen, and some part of me that grief had not yet reached, the part that is older than reason, older than what we know, the part that is just a child who wants her mother, that part pressed accept. The screen was dark, almost entirely dark, with a quality of darkness that was not the darkness of a phone camera in a dim room, but the darkness of somewhere cold, somewhere deliberate, somewhere without windows. And in that darkness, a face, my mother's face, pale in a way that was beyond tired, beyond ill, her eyes wide and fixed on the camera with an intensity that I had never seen in them before and hope never to see again. And her voice, coming in fragments, between gasps, as though even speaking was costing more than she had. She said, "Don't leave. The body in that bed is not me. It's a stranger. They're coming for me. Don't." And then the call dropped. I sat on the ground of that hospital parking lot with my mother's ring in one hand and my phone in the other. And I looked up at the hospital building above me, at the window of the ward, and standing at the window, looking down at me, two figures, the nurse who had given me the ring and my husband. They were standing together at the window of my dead mother's ward, and they were smiling. If you are listening to this right now, I need every part of your attention for every word that comes next, because what I am about to tell you is not a story about grief or hospitals or even about my mother, though it is all of those things too. It is a story about what happens when the people closest to you are building something in the dark, and what they are building is the disappearance of someone who found out what they were doing. And before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you are listening from right now. Tell me if you are someone who has ever looked at two people who were supposed to love you and understood in a single moment that the love was a costume. I read every comment, every one, because this story belongs to everyone who has ever had to be smarter and faster and more determined than the people who underestimated them. Stay with me. Every single word matters. My name is Teresa Boland Vance. I am 47 years old. I am the only child of Margaret Boland, who was 73 years old and is alive. I will tell you that now at the beginning because I think you deserve to carry that knowledge through this story the way I had to carry the opposite of it for the hours between the parking lot and the moment I was certain she was alive. She is alive. She is here. That is where this story ends, and I want you to know it so that you can be present for the middle without being destroyed by it. My mother is a woman of extraordinary, ordinary qualities. She is the kind of person who remembers the names of every person she has ever met and asks after them by name decades later. She grew up in poverty, real poverty, the kind with cold mornings and careful meals, and the specific dignity of people who have very little and maintain everything. She worked as a bookkeeper for 30 years, not a glamorous profession, not a visible one, but the kind of work that requires a precision and an attention to detail that most people don't have and can't fake. She knew numbers. She knew what numbers were supposed to say, and she knew with the precision of a woman who had spent 30 years looking at what numbers actually said when they were saying something wrong. This is important. My mother's professional quality, the specific, practiced, unshakable attention to numerical truth, is what started everything. I want you to hold that. My husband's name is, technically, though he is not my husband in any meaningful current sense, Marcus Vance. We met 15 years ago. We married 12 years ago. He is handsome in the expensive, maintained way of men who invest in the appearance of success because the appearance is doing more work than the substance. He runs a property development company, or he ran what he told me was a property development company, which is another statement I have had to revise. He is charming and social and has a way of making people feel that being in his vicinity is being adjacent to something good, something prosperous, something worth being near. I loved him. I loved him for several years before I started to notice that the performance of prosperity did not always match the documentation of it. And then I started to notice other things. My mother noticed before I did. She noticed in the specific way of someone who reads financial documents professionally, quietly, without announcement, by looking at things she wasn't necessarily supposed to be looking at and understanding what she found. My mother had always been involved in my household finances because I had asked her to be. She was better at it than me. She enjoyed it. It was a form of usefulness that she valued and that I was grateful for. She had access to accounts, to statements, to the flow of money in and out of our life together. And approximately 18 months before the events of this story, my mother had started to find things that did not add up. She brought them to me carefully, not as accusations, as questions. She would say, "Theresa, I see a transfer here that I can't trace to an account I know about. Do you know what this is?" And I would ask Marcus, and Marcus would have an explanation, and the explanation would be plausible, and I would relay it to my mother, and my mother would write it down and look at it and say, "All right." But she kept writing things down. She kept a notebook, a physical paper notebook, because my mother does not trust digital records with things that matter. She kept it in the specific way of a bookkeeper, dated, referenced, complete. 12 months before the parking lot, my mother told me she thought Marcus was moving money, not managing it, moving it, out of accounts that were jointly held into accounts that were not visible in the documentation she had access to, in a pattern that she described to me as the specific pattern of someone who is preparing for a departure, building a pool of assets that would not appear in any accounting of our shared life. I confronted Marcus. He was calm and patient and thorough in his denial, which is the thing about a man who has been constructing a performance for 15 years. He is very practiced at the defense of it. He said my mother was confused. He said she was elderly and that her eyesight was failing and that she had misread figures. He said it with such gentle concern for my mother's well-being that I almost accepted the framing. He suggested very carefully that it might be time to think about whether my mother needed more support, whether her living independently was still the right arrangement, whether she might benefit from a different kind of care. Looking back, I understand what he was doing. He was beginning to construct the version of my mother that he needed, confused, unreliable, failing, the version that would explain away her findings, the version that would make her notebook irrelevant. He was building a story about my mother carefully, the way you build anything meant to support weight, from the bottom up, over time, with patience. I did not see it then. I started to see it when she was admitted to hospital. My mother was admitted to Caro Hill Hospital 6 weeks before the parking lot. The admission was for what was described as a cardiac episode, chest pains, elevated readings, the kinds of measurements that in a 73-year-old woman with a history of heart irregularity produce a reasonable clinical response of monitoring and observation. She was admitted for 2 days of observation. The 2 days became 5. The 5 became 2 weeks. I visited every day. My mother was alert and communicative and frankly annoyed. She found hospital confinement tedious and found the specific quality of enforced helplessness that comes with hospital patienthood especially galling for a woman who had been independently managing herself for decades. She complained about the food. She asked me to bring specific books. She talked about her garden with the specific urgency of someone who knows that things need doing and is not doing them. She did not present, to my observation, as a woman whose cognitive faculties were failing. She was herself, completely, emphatically herself. But the medical team, specifically a Dr. Serrano and the wardeners, a woman named Patricia Keene, who would later be the one to give me the ring, began to present a different picture. In conversations with Marcus, which I later found out were happening separately from my visits, Dr. Serrano had apparently discussed my mother's mental acuity with concern, had mentioned confusion, had mentioned that she was presenting some signs of cognitive decline. Marcus had relayed these conversations to me with the same gentle, concerned packaging he used for everything. He said, "I just want to make sure she's getting what she needs, Theresa. I want to make sure we're not missing something." The notebook was what he was after. I understand this now with complete clarity, though I did not see it as it was happening. My mother had told him, in a visit I had not been present for, Marcus visiting my mother alone, which I had thought was kindness, which was not kindness, my mother had told him she had documentation. She had not specified what, or how much, or where she kept it, but she had told him it existed, because my mother is not a person who conceals her knowledge of a wrongdoing. She is a person who tells the wrongdoer that she knows directly because she believes in the confrontation of truth. She always has. She told Marcus she had documentation of what he was doing and that she was going to show it to me. He left that visit and began to build faster. The diagnosis of cognitive decline was documented in her medical chart. I did not know this. I knew only what Marcus told me, and what Marcus told me was filtered through his construction. Dr. Serrano, I would later discover, had a connection to Marcus that predated my mother's admission by 4 years, a property deal, a financial relationship of the specific kind that creates obligations that are not written down anywhere but are thoroughly understood by both parties. Patricia Keene I have less information about. That investigation is ongoing, but her role in what happened was not incidental. My mother called me on the Thursday, 11 days into her admission. She said, "Theresa, I need you to listen carefully. Something is wrong here and I cannot tell you on this phone." She said, "Come tomorrow morning. Come early. Don't tell Marcus."
I said, "Mom, what?" She said, "Tomorrow, early. Don't tell Marcus." I went home that evening. I told Marcus my mother seemed better. I did not tell him about the call. I set an alarm for 6:30. My phone rang at 7:15 the next morning before I had left. It was Patricia Keene. She said, "Mrs. Vance, I'm so sorry. Your mother passed away quietly overnight. I'm so sorry for your loss." I did not move for a long time after that call ended. I was standing in my kitchen, dressed to go to the hospital with my keys in my hand. Marcus came downstairs. He looked at me. He said, "What's happened?" I told him. He came to me, he held me, he said the right things in the right order, in the right tone. He said he would drive me, he said he would handle everything. He said I didn't need to worry about any of it. I let him drive me. I sat in the passenger seat and I looked at the road and I felt the enormity of a world without my mother arriving, like weather, total, surrounding, changing everything. I did not know then what I know now, but some part of me, the part that remember she said come early and don't tell Marcus, some part of me was already cold in a different way than grief. The hospital, the ward, the room where my mother had been. The bed was empty and freshly made, which is the specific cruelty of hospital efficiency, the speed with which the evidence of a person is removed and the surface prepared for the next person who will need it. Marcus spoke to someone at the nurse's station. Patricia Keene appeared. She said the right things. She guided me with the practiced compassion of the role she was performing. She gave me the ring. My mother's ring, the one my father placed on her finger in 1971, the specific weight of it in my palm, the specific warmth of something that has been worn against skin for 51 years and carries in its warmth the trace of the person who wore it. I said, "Can I see her?" Patricia said, "She's been moved to the hospital's temporary mortuary facility. We can arrange for you to..." Marcus said, "Teresa, you don't need to do that right now. You don't need to put yourself through that today." I let him redirect me. I should not have. I know that now. But I was in grief, or I was in what I believed was grief, and grief makes the path of least resistance feel like the only path, and the person who is guiding you along it feel like someone helping. We went to the parking lot. Marcus said he needed to speak to someone about paperwork. He said he would be 10 minutes. He went back inside. I went to my car. I sat in it for 30 seconds and then my legs did not work anymore and I sat on the ground and I cried and I held the ring and the ring was warm and she was gone. The phone buzzed. I have described what came next. Her face in the dark, her voice in fragments. "Don't leave. The body in that bed is a stranger. They're coming for me. Don't..." And when the call dropped and I looked up at the window, the two of them, Marcus and Patricia Keene, standing together at the window, watching me, smiling the smile of two people who believe they have arranged things correctly and are watching the arrangement hold. I want to describe what happened in my body in that moment because I think it is the most important thing I have ever experienced physically, and because understanding it explains every decision I made in the hours that followed. The grief went away. Not because she was alive. I did not know yet that she was alive. I only had a phone call that could have been many things, a delusion, a cruelty, a mistake. The grief went away because the anger arrived. Not hot anger, cold anger. The specific, focused, clarifying, cold anger of a woman who has just understood that the worst moment of her life was manufactured by two people who are standing at a window smiling. Cold anger is not like hot anger. Hot anger moves and makes noise. Cold anger goes very still. Cold anger starts making a list. I got up off the ground. I put my mother's ring on my own finger. I walked to my car. I did not look up at the window again. I drove out of the parking lot, and I drove 3 blocks, and I pulled over, and I made a phone call. The phone call was to my cousin Deirdre. Deirdre is 52 and is a retired detective sergeant. She left the force 8 years ago to open a security consulting business and has, if anything, become more methodical in retirement than she was in active service. She is the person I should have called months earlier when my mother first brought me the numbers that didn't add up. I did not call her then because calling her would have made the suspicion official in a way I was not ready to make it. I was ready now. She answered on the second ring.
I told her what had happened in the order it happened without emotional elaboration because Deirdre does not need emotional elaboration and because I did not have any to spare. The nurse, the ring, the parking lot, the FaceTime, the window, the two of them, smiling. Deirdre said, "Where are you now?" I said, 3 blocks from the hospital. She said, "Don't go back in, don't contact Marcus, don't contact anyone at the hospital." Where was the call from? I said, "My mother's phone." She said, "Give me the number, I'm going to try to get a location on it." She paused. "It might take time, it might not work, but I'm going to try." She said, "In the meantime, the body they say is your mother, have you seen it?" I said, "No, Marcus redirected me." She said, "That's significant." Another pause. "Teresa, I need you to hear me. What you're describing, if it's what it sounds like, is a situation where someone is being held somewhere. She called you. She was alive when she called you. That means she is somewhere physical and someone can find her. That is what we are doing right now, finding her. Nothing else matters until we have found her." She said, "I'm making 2 calls, one to someone I know who can pull the ping data on that phone number through channels I have access to, one to someone I know in the police who I trust personally, not professionally, personally. I need someone inside before I bring this to anyone official, because if there are people inside this hospital involved in this, an official report goes somewhere I can't control." She said, "Can you drive?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Then drive somewhere public and stay visible and stay on the phone with me." I drove to a supermarket car park 3 streets away. I sat in my car and I stayed on the line with Deirdre. And she talked to me while she worked, not about what she was doing, about ordinary things, small things. The specific technique of a person who has spent a career managing the distress of people in acute situations and knows that the most destabilizing thing is silence. She talked. I listened. I held the ring on my finger, and I breathed. 40 minutes into the call, she said, "I have a location." My mother's phone was active. The ping data showed it at a location that was not the hospital, approximately 2 miles from the hospital, at a property address that Deirdre recognized from the data she was looking at. A property address that was registered through a chain of ownership that she was already pulling on to a company. A property company. Marcus's property company.
I will tell you what we found. Not every procedural detail. Some of what happened in the recovery of my mother from that property involves people and methods and the specific discretion of a retired detective with the right contacts and a deep professional motivation for not explaining her methodology in a public forum. But the shape of it, what it meant, what was there. The property was a residential building that Marcus had acquired 2 years earlier as part of a development project. The development, it turned out, and this is where my mother's notebook becomes the center of everything, the development was the mechanism. The property had been acquired using funds that my mother had traced, moving through accounts that should not have had those funds in them. Investors had put money into a development that Marcus was managing, and the development had become the vehicle for the movement of that money into places that the investors had not authorized and could not see. It was the kind of financial arrangement that has a technical name and a legal consequence, and that my mother, with 30 years of bookkeeping precision, had identified in her notebook with complete accuracy. My mother had found out what Marcus was doing. She had told him she had documentation. He had begun building the version of her that would discredit the documentation, the confused, cognitively declining elderly woman whose notebook was the product of a failing mind rather than a precise professional assessment. Dr. Serrano had been the mechanism for the medical record. Patricia Keene had been the mechanism for the death notification and the ring.
The body in the hospital bed, the body that Patricia Keene had told me was my mother, we do not know everything about this yet, and I will not speculate on what I cannot confirm. What I know is that when Deirdre's contact went to the hospital's temporary mortuary facility, what they found did not match the description of my mother in any particular. The investigation into the body in that facility and its origin is part of an ongoing inquiry that I am told is progressing. My mother was at the property. She was in a room in the lower level, not a finished room, not a room with comfort or light, which is consistent with her description of a dark, cold place. She had been moved there in the night, between her call warning me to come in the morning and Patricia Keene's call telling me she was dead. Someone had come for her in the night, exactly as she had tried to warn me. She had managed to keep her phone concealed in a way she will not specify because my mother's specific brand of determination includes a reluctance to fully explain her methods, which I have decided to respect. She had called me from that room. She was dehydrated, she was cold, she was frightened in the specific, furious way of a woman who has been frightened against her will and finds the being frightened almost as objectionable as the circumstances that caused it. She was also, from the moment Deirdre's contact reached her, completely in command of herself. She gave them the notebook's location from memory. She had not had it with her, but she had the contents of it in her head, dated, referenced, complete, the way a bookkeeper stores what matters. She told them exactly what to look for and exactly where to look for it, and she was exactly right. Marcus was arrested the following morning, Dr. Serrano was arrested within 48 hours, Patricia Keene was arrested on the third day. There are others. The investigation extended beyond the three of them in ways that I will not detail here because the proceedings are active and my solicitor has been specific about what I can and cannot say. I was at the property when they brought my mother out. I will not describe that in detail because it belongs to me and to her and not to the story. It is the part that is too private for telling. What I will say is that she was holding my hand when they put her in the ambulance, and she looked at me and said, in the voice she uses for things she has decided and will not be arguing about, "I told you the numbers were wrong." I said, "You did, Mom." She said, "You should have listened sooner." I said, "I know." She said, "The ring." I held up my hand. She saw it on my finger, her ring, the one my father had placed on her hand in 1971, the one Patricia Keene had used as the final prop in the performance of her death. My mother looked at it for a moment. Then she held out her hand. I took the ring off my finger and I placed it on hers. She looked at it there. She closed her hand. She said, "Better." The legal proceedings are ongoing. I am told they will be ongoing for some time, which is the nature of proceedings that involve financial fraud across multiple entities, a medical professional, and what the investigators are describing as a conspiracy to falsify a death for the purpose of concealing financial crimes. These things take time. I have a solicitor. My mother has a solicitor. Deirdre has been formally interviewed by the investigating team and has, as far as I can tell, provided them with a great deal of information through channels that she is too professional to describe to me in detail. Marcus and I are in the process of divorce. This is a statement that requires no elaboration beyond, yes, of course. My solicitor is very good and is very interested in the full accounting of the financial situation my mother documented in her notebook, which is now part of 2 separate legal proceedings and is as thorough and accurate as everything my mother has ever produced in 30 years of professional bookkeeping. The notebook is at this point one of the most important documents in the case. I have thought about this many times. The fact that a woman's professional habit, maintained across a career and never abandoned in retirement, is what built the evidence that ultimately exposed what was being done. My mother kept her notebook because she was a bookkeeper, and bookkeepers keep records. She kept it with the same completeness she brought to everything because that is who she is. She did not know it would save her life. She only knew that the numbers were wrong, and wrong numbers needed to be written down correctly.
I moved my mother into my home 6 weeks after her release from hospital. Not as a concession to anything Marcus had been building, not the narrative of a confused woman who needed managing. As a choice.
My choice and hers made together with full awareness of what it meant and what it didn't mean. It means we are in the same house. It means she is in the garden on good mornings doing the things her garden needed while she was unable to do them. It means I hear her moving in the kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, and the sound of that, the specific, ordinary, irreplaceable sound of my mother in a kitchen, is something I have decided never to take for granted again. She is 73 years old. She is entirely herself. She keeps a new notebook. I keep the ring on my own finger sometimes when she lends it to me. Not because it is mine, it is hers. It will always be hers. It is 51 years of her history in a band of gold. But because the weight of it is the weight of something that was almost lost and was not lost, and I like to feel that weight and know what it means. I have thought a great deal about the parking lot, about the specific moment when I looked up at the window and saw them standing there together, smiling, about what that smile was, what it was made of, what it was for. It was made of certainty, the certainty of people who have arranged things carefully and are watching the arrangement produce the expected result. A woman sitting on the ground of a parking lot in grief, holding her ring, alone. Exactly what they had planned. The performance running correctly. The story landing as designed. What they had not arranged for was my mother's phone. She kept it in a way that she will not specify. She kept it charged. I have asked her how, and she gives me the small, private smile that she reserves for information she has decided to retain. She called me from a dark, cold room because she is my mother, and she was not going to let the story end with me sitting on the ground of a parking lot, holding her ring, believing she was gone. She is not a woman who permits incorrect endings. She is a bookkeeper. Incorrect endings are errors. Errors get corrected. What I know from the parking lot and from everything that followed it is this. The people who build performances depend on the audience. They depend on you receiving the story they have constructed and believing it and acting from inside the belief. They depend on the grief being total, the disorientation being complete, the ring in the palm being the final, definitive prop that closes the scene. They did not depend on a phone call. They did not plan for a mother who kept her phone and had something to say and knew that the story was wrong and refused, absolutely, characteristically, entirely refused to let the wrong story stand. My mother knew the story was wrong because she knew the numbers. She had been telling me the numbers were wrong for 18 months. I had listened, and I had not fully heard, and then the parking lot made me hear everything at once. If you are listening to this right now, and there is someone in your life telling you that the numbers are wrong, a parent, a friend, a colleague, anyone whose precision and attention and care you trust, listen to them. Not later, not when it becomes impossible to ignore. Now. Before the parking lot, before the ring in your hand, before you have to look up at a window and understand in one moment what you should have understood months ago. Listen to the people who know how to read what is actually there versus what someone wants you to see. Those people are rare and they are essential and they are trying to tell you something. My mother tried to tell me. She saved herself when I didn't listen in time, and then she called me from the dark and told me to stay, and I stayed. And here we are. She is in the kitchen right now. I can hear her. She is moving around in the specific way she moves when she is making something that she has decided we need and has not asked me about. In a few minutes, she will call me and there will be food on the table, and she will sit across from me and she will be entirely herself, 73 years old and completely, stubbornly, magnificently alive. The ring is on her finger, the notebook is in the drawer, and the numbers, finally, are adding up correctly. Thank you from everything I am, from the parking lot and from here, from the woman who sat on the ground and the woman who got up. Thank you for listening to every single word of this. If this story reached somewhere real in you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And please subscribe to this channel, because every story we tell here is a story about a person who refused the ending that someone else had written for them and found their own way to the truth. Those stories need to be told. Your subscription means they keep being told. Subscribe, share, and leave me a comment. Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me about the phone call that changed everything. Tell me about the person in your life who keeps telling you the numbers are wrong. Listen to them. I will be reading. I always am.